Hi, my name is Heather Korlicki. I'm a student at Ball State University, and this is my training on the prompting hierarchy. The agenda for this training, first I'm going to go over the what, who, when, and why of prompting. Then I'll provide an overview of the 6 main types of prompts, and I'll finish with some closing remarks. So what is prompting? Prompting is simply the level of helpfulness you provide the learner to demonstrate a correct response. Your helpfulness can range from 0 help to the most helpful. Prompts are used to ensure a correct response from the learner. Who, when, and why? Who, any learner you can use prompts with. Prompts are often used with learners who struggle with listener responding. Individuals who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder may benefit from the use of prompts. When do you want to use prompts? When you're teaching new skills, maybe when you're teaching complex skills, or when you're using the errorless learning procedure. And why would someone want to use prompting? Simply because it increases the rate of responding, minimizes the errors, which in turn will lower the frustration of the learner and will help them acquire more skills more quickly. So what is the prompting hierarchy? The prompting hierarchy is a way of classifying, organizing prompts. The prompting hierarchy details the amount of intrusiveness used at each step in the prompting hierarchy, or in other words, the amount of help and what kind of help you provide the learner at each step in the ladder. Intrusiveness can be understood as the amount of help you provide. Help on the prompting hierarchy can range from 0 help, they're able to complete a task independently, to forced compliance, which would be considered highly intrusive. When you're thinking about using prompts, you always just want to make sure you are meeting the learner where they are and providing the appropriate amount of prompting to the learner. Because one of the things we want to avoid when working with our learners is we don't want them to become what is known as prompt dependent, meaning that they rely on those prompts in order to emit a response. Our end goal is to always ensure that the learner is seeking or striving to help them gain more and more independence. And with that being said, you just always want to provide the least intrusive prompt that ensures a correct response. Another important takeaway with the prompting hierarchy is you always just want to treat the learner with respect and ensure safety. This is big. When we start getting into the physical prompts, you always want to make sure you're doing it in a gentle, safe, and respectful way to the learner. So moving on to the prompt hierarchy, here's a visual of the prompt hierarchy. This is a ladder. So at the bottom, you'll have the independent phase. As you move up the ladder, you see the colors increase and they get darker, and then they move to at gestural, where we're actually start engaging some physical movements. This would be what's considered the least to most. When you go from full physical down to the independent stage, where the person is able to just independently emit a response, that would be what is called most to least prompting. I'm going to go over the stages, the steps in the ladder from a least to most order. So independent prompting, it is a least intrusive or less helpful procedure. This is simply the learner knows how to emit the response. You may state the expectations and they can do it without any help from you. So an example of independent level would be you arrange 3 objects in front of the learner. You may have a ball, a pen, and a cup. You want the learner to identify the ball. You say point to the ball. They point to the ball. No help from you needed. Moving up the ladder, we're at the visual prompt. So this is a little more intrusive than the independent level, which has 0 degree of intrusiveness. But it's still very minimal in intrusiveness. With using the visual prompting at that stage, you just provide more help to the learner to emit the correct response. You may provide a visual cue, such as a picture, a photograph, or video. And then some examples of visual prompting include when you're teaching a learner how to sit in a chair, you may show them a picture of a child sitting in a chair to kind of help him get that connection and to show him what the response is that you're desiring from him. You may ask the learner to stomp your feet while you're playing a video of a person stomping their feet. This would be an example of visual prompting. Moving up the ladder, we're now at verbal prompting. Verbal prompting is a little more intrusive or helpful than the visual prompt because you're guiding the learner verbally to the correct response. So a verbal prompt may include asking probing questions or a command that directs the learner to the correct response. This will become more clear when I give an example. Or you may provide a learner with a verbal cue, such as the beginning of the sound of the word, and then they finish the word out. So some examples of verbal prompting include, maybe you want the learner to say ball. You may say buh, and the learner finishes the word with all, thus completing, emitting the desired response. Verbal prompting includes also when you're teaching a learner to sit in their seat. You may say, when I do my work, I have to sit in my, and then that gives a cue to the learner, like, oh, I sit in my seat, because they probably hear that rule 1,000 times throughout the day. So then they know to go sit in their seat and they emit the desired response. Moving up that ladder even more, we are now at the gestural prompt. This, once again, as we climb up that ladder, we're increasing the intrusiveness and the amount of the helpfulness you provide. In a gestural prompt, it actually involves a physical action from the teacher. So this is the first prompt in the prompting hierarchy, where we're not relying on a visual or the verbal behavior of the teacher, but now the teacher is now beginning to take physical action. Gestural prompts include any kind of gesture, such as pointing to an object or maybe nodding to the object or a desired response. Examples of gestural prompting include, say you have an array of 3, a ball, a pen, and a cup. You want the learner to point to the ball. You may say, which one is the ball, by pointing to the ball. The learner then points to the ball. Another example is you want the learner to sit in their seat. You may point to their seat, and that is a cue, that is a prompt for the learner to sit in their seat. This also works with a head nod. I have several students on my caseload. I walk in and I go to their seat. They know that I'm asking them, I'm prompting them to head to their seat. Moving up that hierarchy, prompting hierarchy ladder, now we're into modeling prompting. Once again, we're increasing in that intrusiveness and helpfulness. Modeling prompting involves the teacher demonstrating the desired response that they wish for the learner to emit. Some examples of model prompting include, you want your learner to sit in their seat, so you show him or her how to sit in the seat. You may say something as you're performing the action of, this is sitting in the seat. So you'll be providing a model in a verbal prompt. Another example is, you want the learner to put away their materials on the desk. You may begin putting away the materials on the desk while saying, this is putting away your things. So you're showing them the action you want them to display. Moving up the ladder, we're almost to the top of the ladder. This is what is called a partial physical prompt. This, once again, increases in the intrusiveness and helpfulness you provide. This is actually the first prompt where you are using touch to help the learner emit the desired response. Partial prompts involve you guiding the learner to the right direction, but allowing them to finish the response out. So you may guide them in the right direction, but you're not forcing that compliance or that response. Some examples of partial prompting include, you want your learner to touch triangle. You may move their hand towards the triangle. You may want your learner to clap their hands. You may gently touch the learner's hands, the outside of their hands, while moving them together and allowing them to complete the clapping action. This would be an example of partial physical prompting. Now we're at the top of the prompting hierarchy ladder, at full physical prompting. This is the most intrusive and the most helpful prompt that you provide a learner within the prompting hierarchy. Full physical prompt involves physically guiding the learner to emit the correct response. You may have heard this referred to as hand over hand. Examples of full physical prompting include maybe you want the learner to touch circle. You gently take the learner by their hand and put their hand to the circle, having them touch circle. Another example is you want the learner to write T. You gently put the pencil in the child's hand, put your hand over theirs, and begin to write T. That would be some examples of full physical prompting. Some closing remarks regarding the prompting hierarchy. You just always want to remember, meet your client where they are. Provide the prompt that is appropriate for your learner to emit the response. Depending on whatever prompt you're using that's appropriate for the learner, after they emit the response, you provide them with reinforcement, a tangible reinforcement and verbal praise. And as you continue to use the prompts, you always want to be looking to fade prompts in order to help create independence. Thank you for listening to my presentation on the prompting hierarchy.